And welcome back to the Ramp Up to Retirement podcast with your host, Dan Reese. Dan, good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you too, Bill.
We are in the middle of a series of episodes aimed at small business owners, or medium business owners for that matter, but business owners who may be on the verge of deciding to sell or what to do with their business. We've covered a lot of ground, and for those of you who may be just stumbling into this series today for the first time, I would encourage you to go back and listen to the first 4 parts. Today's part 5. And the theme of today's, Dan, and I'll let you explain it, is protect. What do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as we run businesses, I'm a business owner. You've been around a lot of business owners. We get so caught up in like growth, which is very important. Sometimes we forget about like, oh, we need to protect our business too. And we're talking about that in kind of the lens of selling or exiting a business and the importance of it today. But it just goes in line with all of our overall, this whole series, right? As we talk about, exit planning is really business acceleration planning. It's really like this process of making your company more valuable and giving you more options. And this is a huge part of it today because it's just neglected very often, because it's one of those things like I always talk about with individual clients, like estate planning. How many people you hear, well, I know I need to do that, but it's one of those things that it's hard to like actually get it done. And then when people do, you hear just this huge sigh of relief, like, I'm so glad we got that done. It really wasn't that hard, So same idea.
No. But I think you touched on a really important point, and I'd like you to expand on it, because every business owner is familiar with the idea of building.
Right.
We got to grow. We've got to build. We need to expand the client base. We need to. But protect is not one. So focus on what it actually means to protect your business.
Yeah. I mean, I think that most people understand there's risk with businesses, right? They understand, there's a lot of different types of risk out there, but what they don't really realize when you think about this aspect, and we're again talking about it in the realm of exit planning, your risks become magnified when someone else is looking at buying your company, right? So like there's a lot of risk, and we're going to do a lot of details in here. But the biggest thing that you need to understand as we walk through these is that the risk from you may look at something and be like, yeah, that's not that risky. Well, an outside buyer might look at it completely differently and say, that's a huge risk, and that's going to substantially reduce what I'm willing to pay for that company because it's out there.
Give me an example of that.
Let's say one of the risks are that you've got a very, most all your businesses with one customer, right?
Okay.
That's a risk that a lot of people may not think about, but there could be other risks, that things like you've got a very important employee that if you lost that person, you'd be in deep trouble, right? And, that's another risk. And an outside buyer is going to look at that and be like, whoa, I am super uncomfortable with that. And the point is that and let's just take that example about losing a key employee. Well, there's ways to mitigate that, because there's insurance you can buy. There's a lot of different things you can do. We'll talk about that. But if that were to happen, think about how quickly the overall or how much more difficult the overall running of your business might become, like overnight.
Oh, sure.
And so the value of your company could plummet just because that person that you were so reliant on to run your company efficiently is gone, whether they passed away or whatever it might be that happened. Right. And so that's kind of what we're getting at, is that a lot of these things, if you take some time, and especially there's experts out there that can work with you, and help you even identify them. But if you take your time, many of these things you can deal with. You know what I mean? There's solutions. And so today, that's really what we're trying to explain, is that, look, number one, recognize that these risks that we'll talk about exist. But number two, recognize that many of them can be addressed in a very good way that's going to mitigate that risk, and it's going to mitigate the chances of the value of your company plummeting if one of those things actually occurred.
Totally understand it. It makes a lot of sense when you put it that way. You talked about key person dependency. I have to ask this question, because what if you're the key person?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, It may change the way you structure your deal when you exit. They may want you to stick around, right? There may be things there that are going to, maybe a little different than perhaps you envision.
Yeah, and that's really good. I'm glad you brought that up because we're going to start going through some of these key areas, in kind of the effect they'll have. But I do want to comment because we kind of talked a little bit about it. But you know, going back to a buyer's point of view, as we talk through these, keep these things in mind. So if you were buying a company, what do you hate? Well, you hate uncertainty, right? You hate uncertainty more than anything if you're buying a company. And so when we talk about these things, think about it like if you own a company today, think about it if you were turning around and buying another company as to how you would view these things, right? Because you run a company already and you're like, hey, I know how hard it is. And so if some of these things existed, you'd be like, whoa. So, like, number one, key person, you just said it. What if you are the key person, the owner, right? That's a huge risk category. And by the way, we're going to talk about in the next section how to mitigate some of these, but let's just talk about what some of those are. But key person dependency, like you, if you are the company, if you bring in all the customers, if you're the one everybody calls, you're the one that, is the person. Some people would say you really don't have a company. You have it's, what would you call it? Even a sole proprietorship. It's just you.
Right.
You know what I mean? And the value may not be much at all if that's the case. But another one that comes up is customer concentration. So you think of, how diverse are your customers? And also, like, out of those customers, how many of them have reoccurring business, or maybe even like subscription type businesses where you have very specific revenue coming in that you can count on. But if you're not diverse with your customers, and there's a lot of one-offs, and you really don't know what your revenue is going to look like month to month, if you're buying the company again, how are you going to look at that? You're going to be like, I don't know, right? It's a huge thing. A third one, a lot of people don't think about: supplier and vendor reliance. This has become an issue because sometimes, especially if you've been in business a long time, you could have like a preferential arrangement with certain suppliers or vendors.
Yeah.
And there may be an area where there's limited options with that area of the market. And so if all of a sudden you're selling it, in the vendor that you work with might be like, I'm not going to keep that preferential deal. I know Bill. That's why I do it. Bill's my friend. So I go over, I bend over backwards to do, extra for Bill that I wouldn't do for just anybody. So if somebody's walking in and buying that company, they may not get the same treatment, which means that could have a major effect on their business, especially in today's, just-in-time inventory and all these things that so many companies run on.
Yeah.
So that's a huge risk that you have to be aware of. Now we're going to get into a few other things. Lack of documented processes. I mean, in today's world, that is a huge deal because we have a lot more employee turnover, in a lot of companies. And so if you don't have documented processes, again, if you're buying that company and it's just based on what existing people know and it's not written down anywhere, there's no, way to follow it, that's going to reduce things. That's a huge risk, right? And it makes it very difficult to bring in new people and train them.
Yeah. And a lot of people hate the word process. They like, we don't want to be involved in the process. I don't care about the process.
Yeah.
But if you are a buyer looking at it, that's not good enough because, you want to know, how does this business work? It's just a fundamental truth, right? So that if I've got to fire Dan or I've got to fire Bill or they leave, I need to know to tell Jane or John or whoever takes their place what to do and what they're responsible for.
100%. And I'll bring in some other thing that a lot of people don't think about is that if you are you're interviewing for potential new people.
Yeah.
People are asking those questions now because they want to know, when I get hired, is this going to be a really difficult environment for me to come in and learn how to do my job? Right? Because, there's a lot of stories out there where people go in and they're very frustrated, and it causes a very negative work environment because they don't really know what to do. You know what I mean? There's no guide to follow. There's no basic outlines of how to do a job. And so it's not just, you talk about negativity and valuation. If all of a sudden you don't have good procedures and you can't hire good people because they're asking about that, that's a whole nother thing that's going to reduce the value of your company.
Good point. Yep.
Let's get into financial reporting. I will tell you, there are a lot of businesses out there that kind of have been winging it for a long time with financial reporting. It drives their accountant crazy. It makes it very difficult, even at tax time, even to monitor how they're doing, monitor how much money they should be taking out, all kinds of things. And if you don't have good reporting, the other thing is like, how do you demonstrate to a buyer how well you're doing? I mean, honestly.
We're laughing, but that's not a funny point. It's a very sharp point.
Yeah. I mean, oh, how are even like, think of something simple like, hey, I'm curious, if I buy this facility, what are the utilities typically? They're not bad. Okay, well, can I get a real number? Like, do you have like, annually the last 3 years what the power's run, or you know what I mean? Whatever those different things are.
I have a question on this financial point, Dan. I know some people really strongly recommend that the businesses they work with undergo an annual audit, not an official, not necessarily a made to audit, but just a general as a good practice audit. Do you recommend that to small businesses that you work with?
There's no question. And I mean, there's a lot of things too, just like kind of like auditing best practices. If you get somebody good, you can think of the financial audit, but you could also think of like there's some business specialists out there that go in and help businesses run better, and even doing like an informal audit by them to say, how do you stack up against best practices, right? How are you doing? It's interesting, like our compliance arm of my RIA, they actually do ongoing observation of our firm throughout the year. And it's not to be like, aha, I gotcha. It's about, hey, we recognize, there's a few things, a few T's you haven't been crossing on something or other, right? And compliance is challenging. It's like a lot of people aren't really sure what to do sometimes. But that, what that is, that ongoing thing that helps us stay, actually improve, not only keep doing everything we're doing, but continue to improve. And you're right, it's such a key thing for companies if they can have ongoing observation so that they can, number one, recognize things, but number two, make improvements even on the fly. And, so like sometimes even annual, maybe not even enough, right? Like it's like, hey, let's take a snapshot, like mini audits, even quarterly,
Yeah.
To see how numbers are stacking up if there's something we need to recognize.
Well, yeah, and it's a great way to answer that question. What are your energy costs? Well, here's the last audit we did 6 months ago or whenever it was. It's there for them to take a look at. No, 100% understand the wisdom of that.
Yeah, no, it's great. And then the last thing that a lot of people don't think about is regulatory or legal exposure. So depending on what business you're in, like regulation, like, okay, so my business, we have regulation by the SEC, right? And some other people as well. But like, point being is that the SEC can change, some of the rules, right? They can do that. And that can affect certain businesses, and how you do things. And so again, if you're looking at it as a buyer, you could possibly find that that's a huge negative. Like that could, really affect profit margins and other things depending on, think of environmental things, like environmental rules have changed. Like that's a big one that's affected, manufacturers and things like that. So those are all out there as risks that you have to be aware of, because it's a real thing that can affect what someone else is willing to pay for that.
Yeah, and fortunately, risk is something that can be mitigated. You can manage it. You can deal with it. So why don't you give us some pointers on what we can do or what business owners can do to manage that risk, and when's the best time to start doing this?
Yeah, I mean, I would tell you, like most times, if you have a business valuation specialist come in and start working with you, and there's some great ones out there as a business owner. That's not something I do. That's something that they're specialists, right? They're going to come into your company. They're going to start looking at how you're doing everything, and they're going to identify some of the biggest risks first. So think of low hanging fruit. Like, hey, do we have these things in place? For example, do you have a buy-sell agreement in place? Like if something happened to you so the business can continue to run. Because guess what? A lot of times if you don't, all of a sudden the owner, somebody you never anticipated it would be, that has no idea how to run your business. And all of a sudden what might have been very valuable is worth very little because it's a mess, right? Because you don't have that continuity plan in place. Key person insurance. I mean, that's a very simple thing to go do, right? To get in place. So if you've got those key people, are they insured? So if something happens, they become disabled, they die, you've got money available to replace them and get people trained up and all those other things, and the business interruption in the short term that could take place. How about building leadership redundancy? Now, that sounds like a big fancy term, right? But the reality, you're deepening your bench.
I agree. I happen to be a big proponent of leadership and leadership redundancy. But to go back to an earlier point, some businesses are the owner.
Yeah.
And the owner, in some instances, doesn't like to feel like they're being challenged. They don't like to feel like they don't share. They don't delegate, right? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think I saw. I think it was a book I read at one point, and it was really good because a lot of times, because I'm the owner of a business too, a lot of times we think nobody can do this like us.
Of course, Dan.
It's this ego, it's this pride, like you're trying to pump yourself up, like no one else can do it. You would be shocked how many things other people can do. And so one of the exercises to go through as you're working during the day is to identify the task you're doing and say, hey, could someone else do this? Or could I see if someone else could do this and maybe start experimenting with some of these things? And the goal is you want to get to a point where you can hand off as much as possible, and, so that other people can do those things. Like the ultimate test is, could you leave for 3 or 4 weeks and could the business still run effectively? And if the answer is no, then you've got a real problem, right? And it's not something you're going to fix overnight, but it is things that can be fixed with, if you really want to. That goes back to, the desire to want to do it. But really good point there. So that leadership redundancy really is like allowing other people in, right? So allowing other people to take on some of these things.
Yep.
Doesn't mean you lose control. There's lots of protections you can put in place, but the more broad your leadership team is, the more people that can lead, the better off you're going to be and the more valuable your business is going to be, right?
Yep.
Diversifying revenue streams. This is such a key thing. Like when you start looking at your numbers, this goes back to financial reporting. Where do our revenues come from? How diverse is it? How much of it's reoccurring and how much of it is one-off type things? And you start looking at it and you're like, you got to be honest with yourself. You're like, oh my gosh, we have 70% of our business is coming from 1 or 2 people. Probably not great for someone else because, one of the things that occurs, let's go back, Bill, to that's my buddy that actually buys a bunch of stuff from me. They may not buy it from you anymore if you sell it. And, or from the new owner, I should say. That might be a relationship that they don't follow through because they've just done it because of you and not necessarily because of the product, right? Or the service that's being offered. And so, you really just have to diversify out and make sure you've got a good, broad customer base and try to increase reoccurring revenues. And there's lots of ways. I mean, Netflix is the king of that, right? I mean, Netflix has built an incredible business for us paying what we used to pay for. You'd go rent a movie and you'd pay for that movie you rented. Now, all of a sudden, you just pay every month, whether you watch anything or not.
Exactly.
A couple just other quick ones that we talked about it. Document standing operating procedures, systems, get those in place.
Yeah.
There's tons of great, actually, that's one thing, AI. Like I started using Claude, which is, there's so many of them out there, but when you're brainstorming on stuff like this, you would be amazed at what some of these things can do to help you kind of organize thoughts and start creating some of these systems. So that will help you accelerate those things. And it's kind of neat. It gets kind of fun too. And then last thing is just strengthen governance and reporting, overall reporting. Make sure that you've got, board of directors in your business. That might sound funny if you're not a huge business. But, having a group of people to sit down and talk, that might be your best customers. You could bring in an advisory council, and just making sure that they're getting what they want. You're providing valuable things. Those things go a long ways to really helping you reduce a lot of that risk.
I'm curious, this is occurred to me when you were talking about that. If you have like an advisory council, even if it's informal, if you're 3 or 4 best customers, is it wise when you get ready to sell the business, when you know that it's up, to let them know, just so that they have a heads up? Is that a smart thing to do and maybe a really good thing?
I think transparency. So let's back up a little bit. We're doing exit planning, or we call it value acceleration, right? What better way to make your company more valuable than to have some of your key customers in and all on the same page? They know you're not going to work forever. They know at some point you probably want to move on and do other things.
Yeah.
So with those meetings, I mean, be transparent and say, hey, I'm looking at this. I'm trying to make sure. And the thing is, you would want to position it as an owner as, hey, when I'm not here anymore, I want this business to continue to do a great job for you as customers. So, talk about that stuff. What are some of the things that you would worry about if I'm not here anymore? You know, and let's see if we can address those in a way. That could be a longer term contract, right? There could be a lot of things that maybe would help, ease their minds and have them on board. But it's the same thing with employees. Employees, like a lot of owners are like, well, I don't want them to know until I sell it. They know that you know what I mean? They know you're of a certain age and you're probably going to sell it at some point. It's better to talk to them and say, hey, I want this to be good for everyone. Transparency is always going to be the best policy.
Amen. Because yes, people talk whether you want them to talk or not. People know whether you think they know or not. So yes, I am a big fan of transparency. So as we wrap up this episode, why don't you bring this home for us, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is when you start thinking about starting on this path of making sure you're protecting your business, it can be overwhelming. Just start small. Number one, pick 2 or 3 things that you're like, yeah, I want to knock those out. One of the greatest business, the entrepreneurial operating system, EOS, that a lot of people follow, they talk about rocks. Like pick a rock, which they just consider one thing you want to try to accomplish in a quarter, right?
Yep.
Pick a rock and knock it out. So don't try to do too many things at once. If you're totally lost, where you're like, I don't even know where to start, there are some really good resources that we can provide. If you listen to this, just give us a call. We'll get you hooked up with one of them. But they're companies that this is what they do. They literally come in, they work with you. The cost is, I feel like, pretty reasonable for all the value they provide. And they can help you identify things to start with, right? And so you knock out that low-hanging fruit. And the thing that I would tell you, everything you do is going to add value to your company. And so it's like, just think of it that way. Every one of these things I check off the list, my company's becoming more valuable and more sellable when I want to sell it. It's like you're going to have more buyers, you're going to get bigger multiples because these things have been addressed.
Sure.
And like I said before, always look at this stuff through the eyes of buying, not selling. If you were buying the company, what would you want? You know what I mean? Would you want it super dependent on 1 or 2 people and 1 or 2 customers? I would say probably not, right? The more diverse it is, the more skilled people, the deeper your bench of the company you're buying, probably the more you're willing to pay for it. So like, hey, this company can run right now. Like I can buy it and they're running well today. And so that's the big thing that I always tell everyone is look at it through the eyes of a buyer, not as of a seller, because when you look at it from your own view, you're probably going to kind of be like, oh, that's not that big a deal.
Yep. It occurs to me as we're getting toward the end of this episode, one of 2 things have happened. Can happen here. One is you can either do your own sort of enterprise risk audit, and there's no reason why you can't do it yourself. But that is the value of these external resources that you keep talking about in terms of a business owner calling somebody in. They can do it for you, right? And then you have your risk identified. You have the things, you have the rocks, you have it there in front of you, and you know what you need to focus on.
I so much agree with that. And one of the best ways to get something done, and this sounds kind of maybe a little odd, but it's to spend money. Because the thing is, like, I'll give you a very, very simple example. I've had on my to-do list, I'm not even kidding you, for probably 2 years at least to update my LinkedIn profile page. Because, I'm like, I need to fix that. I need that. I finally wrote a check to a consultant to help me do it. And guess what? I'm going to be fully updating that in the next week or 2 because I've gone through the whole process. with that person to help me kind of clean it up and make it more appropriate and up to date, and it's going to be done. And it's the same with this stuff. Like, as a business owner, you are going to probably react to putting out fires as quickly, more than anything. Like, I got to deal with whatever's on my plate.
Exactly.
And so if you go hire someone, you are right, Bill, something's going to get done, more than likely, because you spent money and you're going to be like, okay, I spent money. I need to follow through with this.
Either that, or you're not a very smart business owner who probably, but we've got none of those listening to this podcast.
That's right.
So Dan, for those who are listening to the podcast, what's the best way for them to reach out to you aside from, your brand new updated LinkedIn profile?
Yeah, our website's great. There's a lot of good business resources at averywealth.com, which is in the show notes. You can click on that and get to it. You can always give us a call if you just want to reach out and chat a little bit about these things. There's no cost or anything to do that. I'm happy to talk about it. I love this stuff as a business owner too. I've got a lot of interest around it. But I would tell you that this is a journey. This is a total journey. And as a business owner, you owe it to yourself and your family to do good exit planning and good value acceleration, because you've got something you worked your whole life for, more than likely. It's like, make the most out of it and reduce your stress around it. So, when it's a good time for you to make a change in life, that it can be done and you're going to get the most for your company, and the process is going to go smoothly, or much more smoothly than it would otherwise.
Nothing like going into something prepared.
That's right.
Aware. Exactly right. So for those of you who are listening to this podcast who are not subscribers, I would ask you to do something really, really simple. Just hit the follow button, become a subscriber. That way, every time Dan drops a new episode of his podcast, you'll be notified. You can give it a listen. And I don't think you're going to want to miss the next episode, because this next episode in the series is about how to increase the value, how to build your value of your company as you're looking at exiting it. So hit that follow button. The other thing I would ask is, if you like the podcast, let people know. Tell them about it. Word of mouth promotion is a invaluable tool of promotion, and we would very much appreciate it. So until next time, I'm Bill Tucker. On behalf of Dan and everybody at Avery Wealth, thank you for taking the time to listen today. We'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to Ramp Up Your Retirement. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at www.averywealth.com or give us a call at 517-783-1695. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Avery Wealth. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. The opinions voiced in Ramp Up to Retirement with Dan Reese are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine what may be appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, accountant, financial or tax advisor prior to investing. Guests on the show may not be affiliated with CWM LLC. Views and comments by guests may not be representative of CWM LLC. Investment advisory services are offered through CWM LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Carson Partners, a division of CWM LLC, is a nationwide partnership of advisors.